an opportunity to chat. So if you've got specific points you'd like to bring to both Sean and myself or others, feel free to use those tools. We also have handouts attached to the GoToWebinar. We've got the metadata on the Strava edges, the Strava Metro user guide, our Strava license agreement, along with the actual PowerPoint presentation that Sean will be providing today. The way that we have the webinar set up is basically it's just a one-way communication. We've muted everybody's lines because of the many people that are attending today. Right now we have about 135. So to try to keep minimize any audio difficulties, we're muting all lines. So if you do have a particular point, question that you'd like to bring up on the line, you could send me a chat, and I will open your line up if you need the audio. So with that, Sean, are you good?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Hopefully everyone can see my screen and the presentation. And as we go through, like Joe said, if you can go ahead and put those questions into the question pod, and we'll get to them at the end with the time we have left. We'll go ahead and get started. So our agenda for this morning, again, we're going to focus on training, and we're going to look at how you guys can access the data, some of the characteristics of what we have and what we're providing through our partnership with Strava, and then some of the potential uses. And that'll just be a short portion of the presentation. And again, we'll do a question and answer session at the end. And like Joe said, this training is being recorded.
I was going to just pipe in on one item, Sean.
Go ahead.
Kind of establish that timeline. So when it comes to the Strava data, we actually purchased the data June of 2015. We had done our first round of the training for the Strava data. We did back in August of this year, and then we did our first release in October, and we do plan to continue quarterly, or I don't think we've established how frequently we would do the releases, but do those continuing, and then so this kind of training is kind of in to address that need to be clear on what information we have on these releases and facilitate any questions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joe. And we released like Joe said, we released the data back in October. We have data back to 2012, and the contract that we have with Strava runs through 2016, 2018?
Yes.
I think 3 years.
Yeah.
So as I'm working through that backlog, more and more information will be out there, and we'll get into what's been released so far and what we have in the pipeline to come. So as far as access to the data, real simple, who can access it? Any government, whether it's state, local, university, MPO, all of you have access to this information. Also contractors, as long as you have a valid contract or a research project with a government agency, you can access and download this data. And it's available through the department's Unified Base Map repository. And that's a login controlled system. And I'll get into some of the legal requirements and what we have to do, but we'll just first go through how you go in and set up an account. If you work for the DOT, you would use that top link, and it would automatically log you in. And I'm not sure, when you download each data set, it requires that you accept a license. I'm not sure if it requires that for DOT folks. I know that it definitely requires it for contractors and consultants. And that is specific to each set of data that you download. You have to ideally read that user agreement, all the terms, and agree to uphold that user agreement. So we've had some emails back and forth on contractors accessing the repository because it can be a little bit confusing. So when you go to that link, you would go over here to the right-hand side, click Login. Let me get my little pointer. You would click Login over here, and then once you get to that screen, you would go ahead and click Create New Subscriber Account. And what you would do is you would enter your work email address, and there's a list of domains. You can see some of them here. Some of them are government, some of them are consultants. If you don't see your domain in that list, you want to go ahead and click that link right above where it says Contact the UBR admin. You have to go ahead and click that link and ask that they add your domain to that list so that you can go ahead and access. So once your domain is in that list, you create a username and a security question and a password. And if this is your first time creating an account and you go to log in, typically what you'll get is this error screen, and it'll say, error, your subscriber account is valid but is not authorized. When you see that error screen, it's not an error. It just requires one additional step on our side and on my side. So if you go ahead and when you see that, send an email to this address at the bottom of the screen, and we can go ahead and get you authorized, and after that you'll be able to download any of the data that you're authorized for in the UBR. So again, that's just a quick clarification, and hopefully that'll help the consultants out there in their efforts to get access to the UBR. So to the data specifically, the legal requirements, and this is all laid out in the user agreement, the user license and the metadata document that's included in the handouts. But a real quick summary of what's included in there. The biggest thing is this data is proprietary. Both the Strava data and the nav streets, the street network data that we use, we buy that from both of these companies, and so it's proprietary, especially the information from Strava. You know, they are a private business, and they have a competitive interest to protecting their data. So again, that's why this information is restricted to governments and their contractors. We did get our legal office to go through and provide a statement that's in the metadata that says that this data is exempt from public records disclosure. So if someone writes you and says, hey, can we get access or can we have this data, it is exempt from public records. The counts, so the count of the number of people on, or the number of users on a specific street segment, I believe is, it can't be shared publicly. But in that vein, we are working on some public products and information that you can take a look at that we can share with the public, so that they can get an idea, maybe not of the exact counts, but of the relative use of specific street segments. So again, accessing the data, it requires accepting that user agreement. We've included a metadata both attached to the shapefiles that we release and as a separate document with the data. And looking through the user agreement, anytime this information is used in a report or used on a map or something along those lines, you have to put that statement in their data license from Strava, and that's according to the user agreement terms. And if you have any questions or issues with how we can work through these legal requirements, please let us know. We're still trying to work with Strava and understand what the extent and the limits are of these legal requirements.
Sean, I've got one question from Ed Rajewski. If data can't be shared publicly, how can it be used?
That's a good question, and we'll get to that when we look at some of the use cases.
Okay.
I mean, I think it can be used within a agency to understand where bicyclists and runners are using the street network. I mean, we can analyze it, we can look at it for our interest, we can look at it based on where bicycle crashes are occurring. We can use it to get more information and try and develop some absolute counts using correlation, and we'll talk about that later. We just can't release the data publicly. And the issue on whether we can release the number of users on a specific street segment, that's something I can check with Strava and find out what their comfort level is. But again, it's mainly intended as a tool to be used within an agency to understand where people are running and biking on our roads. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep. So as far as what we have, again, we have summaries. So we have both raw data and summaries. And the summaries, they're rolled up or summarized for yearly counts, so for a particular calendar year, both for the entire calendar year, and then use that's on weekdays and weekends, and same thing with monthly and seasonal, and we'll get into what seasonal means. But the important thing to know and understand as far as the raw data, that the raw data, the way it's captured, it summarizes for every minute where there is a trip across a particular street segment. Strava gives us a record, and so it summarizes at 9:35 today. It would tell us how many users went across a particular street segment in the state of Florida, and so that's the smallest scale we have. But then these summaries, I think, are the main thing that folks can use for some of their analysis, and it's an easier product to work with because it's in this shapefile form and can be used in a GIS. And both the summaries, those are going to be released through the DOT's Unified Base Map repository. The raw data is available, but we're not going to put that into the repository. It would be something that would be provided on a case-by-case basis, and I'm not really going to cover what exactly is in there, but again, we're mainly going to look at the summaries for this training. So talking about the street network, an important thing to know about Strava is the way they collect and capture their information is it's kind of the Hansel and Gretel approach. They collect a latitude and longitude every second, so they're dropping little points just in space. They're not tracking use along a particular street network, so they just have basically dots on a map or dots on a blank surface. And when we get the data from them, we provide them with a product that we have within the department, NavStreets, formerly known as NavTech. And it's a street network that covers everything from parking aisles and malls all the way up to interstates. So it's a pretty comprehensive street network. Again, that product is available through the Unified Base Map repository. It's got about 1.7 million street segments, so again, it covers a pretty good portion, or the vast majority of the state. An important thing to know about it is it does have attributes associated with it, and I won't get too much into that product, but there are some attributes that can be used. We don't include them with the Strava data, but they can be linked through the link ID in the here data and the ID field in the Strava data. And some of the information you can get are street names or alternate street names, the travel direction for a particular road. So what direction does the motorized vehicles travel on that road? The speed category, and it's not an absolute measure like 45 miles an hour, but it's a a relative measure, and I haven't looked into it too much, but there is information on what the speed of the roadway is. We'll tell you whether a section or a street segment is urban and rural, and whether it's divided and or undivided. And that doesn't exactly match the DOT's definition of divided and undivided, but again, it provides some general information. And on those attributes, you sort of have to dig into them a little bit more and make sure that they're actually showing you what you think they're showing you, because the nav streets data, they mainly use it for routing, so it's not, you shouldn't understand it as a inventory of the roadways. But it does help when you don't have any other information about the roadway. So the characteristics, basically what's the user base, or how many trips are we looking at? And this is from what we have so far in January to May of 2015. So it's only a partial year, but this is some of the information. Again, for the ride, that is the predominant use for the app, and that's where most of the activities are, and you can see about 400,000 activities. People are generally going about 18 miles for the median trip distance. They're generally out for about 90 minutes, and this gives you a breakdown of, for people that provided a gender, again, 75% male for the ride, 17% for the female, and 6.7% left it blank. It's generally a younger group, so again, more than 50% of the folks are under 45 years old, and there's a little asterisk there because that's only for folks that provided a birth date or their age, and that's, I think it's like 80 or 90% of the folks provide an age, but we have this information for each year and each mode of the data, and then also you see in there about 14% of the trips. So 14% of those 435,000 are commutes. Again, on the run, it's a little bit less, about half of what you see in the ride mode. Shorter distance, obviously, shorter time, a greater percentage of females in the run group, and it's generally a bit younger, so greater than 60% of the folks are under 45 years old. And then it's important to understand Strava. And so that the previous slide and this slide together, it's important to understand who they market to. They market to the active crowd, the folks that are out running and biking. There is, again, as we saw, about 15% of the trips in 2015 are commutes, but some of those trip distances are longer. So again, it's just important to look at Strava and understand who they market to and who their audience is, and as a result, who the user base is that we have with this data.
Sean, I just wanted to, there was a question specifically related to that. This is from Seth Goab. I had understood that Strava was primarily recreational, competitive, enthusiast users. How representative or typical is the information for general pedestrians and cyclists?
Yeah, as far as commuting, daily activity.
Right.
We'll take a look at that. I have a slide showing the proportion of commute trips. I think it's helpful. So some of our approach, Dwayne Carver, our bike ped coordinator, has talked about this before. I mean, when we look at auto trips, we don't really look at the trip purpose. We're just we're counting the number of trips. And I think and paraphrasing and speaking for him, I mean, his approach is trips are trips, whether they're recreational trips or commute trips. It certainly, as time has gone by and looking at the data going from 2012 until 2015, it's covering a greater, especially on the ride, it's covering a larger and larger area. I mean, in Dade County, the vast majority of the roads have at least one trip on them. So it doesn't give us an absolute sense, but it certainly gives us a relative. So among this user base, what roadways do they prefer to use. And I think that's important. And from my perspective, looking at it from a safety perspective, you know, folks are going to look at a particular roadway and look at the safety of a roadway and either choose to go on it or choose not to. And at least my thinking is that that would be at least somewhat similar to what a general or just a regular cyclist, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, there was a similar question comment from Rafael Almario. Can Strava data be treated like a random sample? In other words, how representative is this of the general population of runners and bikers? So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't say it's a random sample because it's targeting folks that are recreation and yeah, that are cycling. I wouldn't call them enthusiasts, but that are out there for the recreational purpose.
Right.
That's who they're marketing to. So I wouldn't call it random, but it's I would say it's representative of their choices. We shouldn't use this as an absolute count. You know, one of the things that I've seen in the data is sometimes trips you'll see less coverage of trips in lower income areas. You see a lot of trips out on the beach, out on A1A, out on the coastal routes. So it's important to understand that we're only getting a segment of the market. We're not doing an absolute count, or we're not surveying the entire cycling community. It's only going after this one portion of the cycling community. So hopefully that answers your question and it gives you an idea of our approach to it.
Yep. Very good. Thank you, Sean.
And the purpose in going into that is just understanding who the user base is, and that may color some of their choices and the routes they choose. So going back to field names and file names, very exciting things. There's sort of a code in the file names and in some of the field names that hopefully this will help decode. When we're talking about edges, or when you see edges, that's just another word for street segments. We haven't released this data yet, but the node information is intersection, and when you see roll up, it just means summary. And then we have season as well, and that's the on season, so it's a summary just for a particular portion of the year. The Strava default, again, is April 1st through October 1st. And we're working with them to figure out, obviously that's not, in Florida, that's not when people typically want to be outside because it's very hot and very humid. So we're working with Strava to try and figure out when Florida's season occurs. And that may be different for southern Florida as opposed to northern Florida. So over on the right-hand side, again, if we want to decode what that says, the FL edges, it means a ride summary for the street segments from January 1st to 31st for 2015. So again, hopefully that helps to decode some of the file names and provide a better understanding of what you're taking a look at. And then the field names, you'll see this kind of cryptic code when you're looking at the field names, and this is just breaking down the acronyms or the shortened versions. The ATH is athlete, ACT is activities, or we can think of it as trips. When you see an R at the very front of the field, it means reverse or against the direction the line was digitized, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. A is, again, with the digitized direction. T at the beginning means total. CMT is count. CMT is commute. And at the very end where you see _0, and this is for the field names, _0, _1, it represents a time period. And those are listed in the metadata. So over on the right-hand side, again, if you see T ath count, it means the total number of athletes for that summary period for that roadway section. And athletes is a unique count, and it can only, there's some peculiarities on that. It can only be used for that summary period. So it'll give you the count, for example, the number of users that went across that segment in January of 2015. It'll give you a unique count. And then that RACT count _1, again, it's the total trip count for the AM period from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. for the summary period for trips taken against the street, the direction the line was digitized. And again, we'll get into that, what the digitized direction means. Again, the commute flag, there's a couple different ways that can be captured. Strava takes a look at the data, where a person started, where a person ended, so they're trying to look for one-way trips of a shorter duration, and I don't, off the top of my head, I don't have the exact time, the time cutoff that they use. So one direction trips of a shorter duration and of a certain mileage. That's one way that they designate a trip as a commute. And just recently, they added this flag. So when you use the app and then you go to save your trip, you have an option in there to hit the commute button. And that will, I'm assuming on their end, go ahead and raise a flag and say, okay, the user is designating that this trip was a commute. So going to talking about digitized direction and travel direction. This is a section of road, and the arrows represent the direction that a particular roadway was digitized. So when someone was drawing this line in a GIS, they clicked a button at one end and then drug the line to the other end, and that's the digitized direction of that particular line. And what Strava does with those RACT count and AACT count, so reverse and width, they give you an idea of the direction that someone's going on a particular roadway, or the direction the trips were going on that particular roadway. So as we can see here, the top road, there's a greater number of folks, 121 trips going against, and you can see the arrow here at the end. Let me see if I can get a little highlighter. You can see the arrow here at the end of the road. So the against trips are 121, which, if you take a look at it, it's the travel direction of the roadway. So 120, another way to say it is 121 of the trips went with the travel direction of the road, and 89 of them went against. Again, on the bottom, the folks going with, again, because we have the arrow down here, because both of them are done going left to right, digitized going left to right. There's more trips going with the travel direction than against the travel direction. And as we go to the next slide, you'll notice right here that there's another arrow right at the end of the street segment, and it's actually divided. This street section is divided into two segments, and that street segment is digitized opposite the direction the other one was digitized. So when you're looking at this, the directional information, it's important to take a look at that and keep that in mind, that the digitized direction doesn't correlate with the travel direction of vehicle traffic on that roadway. So now we can go ahead and talk about some use cases. Again, some of the use cases that I've seen so far are measuring relative bike volume. Another use is estimating actual bike trips, and we'll talk about some of the data needs and limitations on that. It can be used for route choice and understanding the route characteristics. So total activity count. This is a section in Dade County. and the darker the color, the more trips you have on that particular segment. And as you can see here in the middle, I'll get the highlighter back out again. Looking at the data, it looks like folks choose to go here and then for some reason hang a right and then go left down here. So as someone looking at safety, I would be interested in what's happening in this, what's happening in this middle section here. Is it that there's, why are they choosing, why is there more volume going onto these roads as opposed to those roads? So I think it's important, I think that's one of the beneficial uses of this. Looking at safety or looking at the characteristics of this roadway, you can also look at trip origin and destination and look over here in this area. Maybe there's a park over here that folks are wanting to go to, or there's a transit station or something along those lines that folks are choosing to go to. So again, I think that's the value of this data, is looking at across the entire roadway network, the relative use. So looking at commutes. So what I've done here is within ArcMap, I've used the commute count field and then the total activity count to create a ratio. So the closer the number gets to 1, the higher the proportion is of commutes on a particular roadway. So you can see the red areas here in the middle. Let me see if we can go back. No, I didn't capture that. But if you look at the red areas here in the middle, the characteristics of those roadways is it's more one-directional trips or more commutes based on the flag that Strava provides, and the flag that the users can now provide to us. Again, so it gives you a general idea within the city of Miami where are the commute trips and generally where are the recreational trips, or where there are a higher number of commute trips. Another thing you can take a look at, you should see it now, is you can look at the characteristics of a particular roadway as far as the time people are using that roadway. This is an area in downtown Miami. An important thing I think to take a look at is the causeway over here. You can see that there's a high number, so where the colors are browner or closer to red, there's a high use in the morning. So again, that time from 5 a.m. until about 10 a.m. And then over here, you can see in the PM peak, it's not getting used as much. And with the data we provide, that we're providing from Strava, you might look at AM peak during the weekdays or AM peak on the weekends and try and find when folks are using that stretch of roadway more frequently. Again, it gives you an idea of the characteristics of the trips on that particular roadway. All the while, you have to keep in mind who our user base is. I mean, again, it may be the more recreational type folks, but there are some folks who use this for commuting that are providing information. So estimating actual bike trips, this is something that we're not able to do yet, but working with you guys, working with local governments, and folks that are doing actual counts, I think it's something that we can get to in the future. So to estimate the actual number of bike trips and using the Strava data, what we would need is we'd need a field count, the time period when that field count occurred. So if it was on Tuesday from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. or on Saturday from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. Whenever it occurred, we would need to know that. And then we would need to know the specific location where the count occurred. And then using that, so using the number of field counts, we could look during that same time period, again, even down to the minute, and find out on that day, on that minute, or during that month or during that year, what percentage of the field counted trips are represented by the Strava data. And we can use that just like we use count information on the roadways and counting vehicles. We can use that to extrapolate from that count location and get an idea within specific limits of how many actual bike trips occurred on roadways where we didn't have a count. And so we'll look at a slide after this and understand or take a look at the data a little bit better. Some of the limitations, Strava is actually we'll take a look at the slide and then come back. So this is some information from Southeast Florida, from District 4, that they took as part of their count program. So what we did is we took the counts the field counts that they had, and then looked back in the Strava data and looked at a correlation. So this is a scatter plot on the x-axis on the bottom. It's showing the actual number of trips that were observed in the field, and then on the y-axis, it's the number of trips that occurred in Strava. So we have data from 2012 and 2013. And I think the important thing to take a look at here is the changes occurring at the same site. So here with A18 Hillsborough Inlet is one site. The number of field trips didn't change too much. It went from a little bit more than 400 to right around 500. But in that same time period, the Strava use doubled. So it went from less than 15 all the way up to 30. And same thing over here with A1A north of Palmetto Park Road. Again, there was about 20 in 2012, and then greater than 45 in 2013. And relatively the same number of counts on that roadway. So going back to our limitations, let me go back to the previous slide. Let me clear those marks. So again, market growth. Strava, their growth of their user base is doubling every year. And so that's important to understand when you're looking at the growth, the changes in traffic on the changes in the Strava use on a particular section of roadway year over year. Just because a count doubles on a particular roadway doesn't mean that the actual number of bike trips doubled on that same stretch of roadway. We are working with Strava to get county by county growth factors so that we can, when we're looking at counts from 2012, going back to the previous slide, and we see 15, we can apply a growth factor and understand, is traffic really changing on that roadway, or is this just a function of Strava's increasing penetration, or they're increasing growth into this market. Extrapolation, we haven't gotten into the details yet, but as we understand it, you can only extrapolate out so far. You can't use one count station and then extrapolate to the entire county. So we're still working through that, and we welcome any input and help on how we can use this data to understand the actual bike use on different roadway segments. And then the other limitation is small sample size. The greatest benefit of this data and this information, or the best field counts that would work with this, is if we have any permanent count locations. I know there's not a lot in the state, but any of those that we have, that's going to give us a larger data set to correlate with, and just more consistent data collection over time. It would give us better confidence in the correlation that we're looking at. So let me go Yeah, so that covers that slide. And we're almost done with the training portion of it. So QA/QC, some of the stuff that we've done. One of the things that happens with Strava is sometimes people leave the app running. So we would get trips on I-95, I-10, I-75. Obviously, people aren't biking on I-10 and I-75. So we went ahead and dropped out all of those segments. In the data that's released currently, on very short street segments, we were getting speeds that didn't make sense for a bicycle or a runner. So we dropped out the time fields on those street segments. And then the commute field is also there in the run data. I mean, people aren't running to commute by and large, at least as I understand the use of this app. So we dropped out all the commute counts in the run fields. Again, some of the limitations, we've talked a lot about the user base. Another thing we'll talk about is cell signal quality. And that should be covered in this next slide. So the way Strava collects the data, they're not actually using your GPS location. They're using triangulation between cell phone towers. And that's to preserve the battery use of the cell phone. But at times that can result in paths like this that sort of don't make sense, that aren't following the exact roadway network. I wouldn't, for my use of the app, this is more of the exception than the rule, but it's just important to know that that this can happen sometimes, that the use and the cell phone, the position quality may not be great. So it's something to take into consideration and keep in mind if you're looking at the data in areas where there's not good cell service. So very rural areas, areas with lots of high-rises or lots of tall buildings, that may affect the cell phone signal quality. And I would encourage you guys as users of the app or users of the data to get the app and use it and see what sort of conditions cause issues like this. Again, I find that this is far and away the exception and not the rule. But it's something that's important to understand with the data. So with that, Joe, do we want to go ahead and get some of these questions?
Yeah, I kind of brought out a few questions while we were working through it, but let me get the questions up again.
And what we'll do for all of these trips, all of these questions, if we don't get to them during the webinar today, we'll send an email out afterwards, and I'll go through and answer as many of them as we can.
Okay, got it. Had it hidden on my other screen here. So yeah, there was on one of the slides you talked about that direction.
Yeah, the digitized direction.
Yeah, that digitized direction. I think
Sure.
when you covered that, yeah, so the clarification from Paige Lester was that they don't necessarily represent the direction of traffic.
Correct. I think that's the important thing to remember is the digitized direction is arbitrary. It's not related to the travel direction. So again, as we see on this section, for the top line, the travel direction is that way. The cars, obviously in America, should be going right to left across your screen. But the way the line was digitized, where you see this little arrow, the line was digitized in that direction. So when we have the with count and the against count, which that for this particular section would be, the with count would be ACT CNT, and then the against count would be R ACT CNT. So with count and reverse or against count. So what you can infer from this is 121 trips were taken with the travel direction on the roadway, and 89 of the trips were taken against. An important thing to remember, going back to cell phone signal quality, trips on divided roadways, some of the trips, because the way Strava is capturing or showing this data, I'll use the highlighter. You may have a particular trip, the points may just sort of drop like that, and some of them could drop over here. So trips that were actually taken going this way on this road may show up on this one. It's just, that's the characteristics of the data, and it's just an important thing to keep in mind when you're taking a look at the information and the data.
Okay. There was one on that the cell tower accuracy of the location. There was one reference from Robin Birdsong that the Suncoast Parkway generated a lot of users that may be due to the adjacent Suncoast Trail. So
yeah,
that awareness of facilities that may be nearby.
Yeah, the trips on limited access facilities are not specifically looking at the Suncoast Trail. That's one that I took a look at, and the Suncoast Trail has far more trips on it than the number of trips on the limited access facility. So, and the number of people in a year, remember we have 435,000 trips so far in 2015. The number of trips on limited access facilities is very, very small compared to that. So it's not that everybody does it every single time, but there are trips there, and so we wanted to drop those out just to avoid any confusion.
Okay. Tim Palermo, Palermo asked, is there a way to filter group ride activity?
Not that I know of at the moment. I certainly see that more and more. So following other friends that do group rides, you may see 40 people, 40 Strava users riding on a particular roadway together. We don't have that level of information. So
right.
The information we have is just based on the street segment. We don't have individual trip information because Strava keeps that information private to protect their users.
Right. All right, got about 6 more minutes here. Yeah, this one's from Danielle Joyce. She asked it early on, but kind of going back to the data sets, consultants will only be able to view the data if we have an applicable contract with rights to the data. I think she's just asking to clarify.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a contract with DOT for work or with local government, with some government agency, I mean, we usually don't get into the details about what the purpose is. As long as you are a approved contractor and you have a valid contract with them, we provide access. We don't get into whether, like I said, normally we don't get into whether it's this type of contract or that type of contract, or what the project is trying to accomplish. If you think the Strava data would be useful, we're glad to provide the access.
Okay. I think you touched on this briefly, but any idea of what percentage of pedestrians or bicyclist runners are using the app?
No.
Okay.
That's where that field count information is very important and very helpful for us.
Yeah. So
going back, that's what these lines represent. Okay, so looking at this slide, that's what these lines represent. The line going across the bottom section here, it's basically saying 1% of the trips going across that particular segment were Strava users, and then going up the line, 2%, 5%, 10%. It's going to change for each street segment as far as the percentage of total trips that you see, and then the proportion of that is represented by Strava. It's just going to be that's one of the things we want to work towards, is getting more of these field counts so we can get a feel for how many Strava users are using that particular roadway. As you can see on the graph, I mean, it runs everywhere from less than 1% to greater than 10%. So it just depends on the roadway.
Now, just to clarify on this particular graph here, the yellow ones are 2013. The ones with the dot in the center are 2012.
Correct.
How do you associate which ones are field count and Strava count?
Well, they're both field and Strava. So the position on the x-axis is determined by the number of field trips observed, and the position on the y-axis is determined by the number of Strava trips.
Okay,
so
I follow.
The higher it goes on the y, the more Strava trips. The further out it goes on the x, the greater number of field trips.
Okay, I follow. Thank you. Yep. All right. Actually, if there's anybody who would like to ask an audio question, I'm able to do that on my side. If you could just kind of raise your hand, let me know, and I can unmute your line if you're on the phone. And I say that Raphael, you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yes, hi there. I was just wondering, so as far as the data restrictions, the publishing restrictions of the data, since it's proprietary, is it okay to publish maps that shows, such as like the maps that we were seeing early in the presentation? Are those type of maps okay with the contract that FDOT has with Strava?
Yes. Yeah, as far as I understand, I mean, maps like this showing relative use of the roadways are okay. That's one of the things that's in the future that I'm planning on trying to put together is a web map service. I'm working with our survey and mapping office that would show relative use of roadways. Strava already provides that information on their website. So if you search for Strava heat map, it'll show you across the entire world the relative use.
That's the Strava Metro, right?
Correct. Yeah, Strava Metro.
Yeah.
Strava Metro heat map.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maps like this, they have no problem with us sharing information like this. It's just releasing the actual data, and then the counts. Again, we're still trying to understand and work through that. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
And Sean, we got one more question from a Mike Watt.
Sure.
Mike, your line is open.
Great, thanks. How real time is the data? I know, like with the HERE data for autos, it's refreshed every 2 minutes. How often is this refreshed, or do we just have access to archive data?
So we're getting the data. They provide it to us quarterly. So we'll get the previous 3 months. So we don't have a live real-time feed into their data. But as far as the data they have, it's minute by minute, second by second. They anonymize it and give it to us minute by minute for particular roadways. So that's the smallest scale as far as time that we have it. But we don't have, I mean, like Waze or like other information, there's not a live feed into their database.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Well, Sean, it's right at 10:30.
Okay.
So as I mentioned to you all earlier in starting, we are recording this session. We do have a record of everybody who not only participated today, but registered for this session. So we anticipate sending to you all a link of some sort to where you can access the video. We're just kind of working through some of the logistics of where best to post that video. It's pretty large file size, so it's not easily just sendable via email. So any closing comments, Sean?
Thank you guys for your time, and like I said, we'll get those questions, and hopefully by today or tomorrow I'll have responses to each of them for you guys. And thank you for your patience and your time.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, again. All right, so signing out.